welcome back to my channel. I'm Jazz, the Ever After Reader, and today the book that I want to talk about is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. Yeah, this was a book that I really enjoyed. My sister-in-law recommended this book to me, and it was a lot of fun. Let's get started with a summary. So this book is about Emily Wilde, and she's one of the world's foremost scholars on fairies, and it's set in the early 1900s, which is a really fun time period. So that drew me in pretty quickly. She's this professor at Cambridge University, and she's planning to spend the autumn and winter doing field study on the fairies in this island off of Norway. Wendell Bamblebee is her academic rival, and he invites himself to come do some studies with her. Now, she's trying to prove herself as being a better scholar than him, so she's really upset that he's just come and dropped in on her, especially because he doesn't work nearly as hard as she does. He kind of like pushes work off onto his students and interns, and while she actually goes out and does the really hard academic work. So she despises him, and it's a really fun dynamic that they have. Now, what I didn't expect is that she's long suspected him of being a fairy himself. And very early on in the book, she's proven right. Her suspicions have been right all along. Now, while doing the field work, she unfortunately becomes enchanted by this like mysterious fairy king, and eventually the enchantment starts to overcome her, and she goes and she's gonna free the king, kind of gets trapped by him instead. Then there's this big rescue, and she and Bamblebee leave. They finish their research, and they're gonna head back to this big conference and ultimately to England, and I think back to Cambridge. So a few negatives about this book, some things that I didn't totally love. The author seems to kind of waffle between some language choices. So she spends most of her time writing in a way that is just kind of normal, everyday conversation, like, 21st century type of writing and vocabulary. And then every now and then she will sneak in some sentences that just sound very old, Victorian. Unfortunately, she doesn't do it very well. I feel like she should have just picked one or the other. And instead you have this odd thing that just doesn't quite mesh very well. And what it did is it sort of pulled me out of the story a few times. I would be reading, and then there were these like really jarring jumps between different sentences of feeling like you're being pulled between these two different time periods. And I just wish she would have stuck with what she was good at, and that was writing like a 21st century person. I could imagine that all of this was still happening in the 1900s. Something else I didn't really like was the discovery that Bamblebee was a fairy. She spent a good portion of the beginning of the book explaining that fairies are these really tricky characters. They're kind of nasty. They're almost like genies. They seem to do mischievous things for the sake of the chaos. I thought the mystery was going to be drawn out a little bit longer. I thought you as a reader were going to have to find some little clues and piece it together and kind of figure it out for yourself before it got revealed. But no, it's thrown out there pretty quickly and the mystery is over. And then it's kind of like glossed over too. I thought it was going to be a bigger deal that she discovered it. But the characters just kind of move on, and it's like, oh yeah, that's who I am. Let's keep going. It just felt really odd. And last, the ending just felt a little strange to me. So she's taken captive by the fairy king, and he decides he's going to marry her. And so she's lost in this world, right? I guess when you're in the fairy world, all of your senses seem to get fuzzy and jumbled, and you lose your judgment. And it was really interesting. I really liked how she portrayed that. Eventually, all of the villagers and Wendell will come and kind of break her out of the world. But the actual breaking out part is also glossed over. There's this big tension buildup of she has to remember to do these things just right so that she can escape. But she has to fight, all the fuzziness and losing her consciousness, kind of. It's like she loses consciousness for the entire escape and then wakes up, and now they're back home and she's safe. And there's no explanation of filling in the gaps for you. Um, so that was just quite a deflating read. Um, it was really disappointing. It felt very like Deus Ex Machina, like there's this big problem and it seems insurmountable, and then, no, don't worry, like the gods are swooping in and are gonna save us. And it's kind of funny to say that because that's sort of how the fairies are. And so Wendell, being a fairy himself, swooping in and saving her like that, it's actually very fitting, but still disappointing. I wish that we got to fill the gaps in on that part. But now to the positives. I feel like I have quite a bit more to say, which is great. There's more positives than negatives. This book reads like a journal, which I was so happy about. I thought it was going to read like her encyclopedia. Also, kind of a funny thing, whenever I see encyclopedia like this, I think of Ted from How I Met Your Mother and how he's like, oh, it's encyclopedia. Does anyone else think that? Oh, yeah, each chapter is a new journal entry in her book, which is so much fun. And then every now and then you get a little entry in there from Wendell. He'll like take her journal and write some things in there. So you get a couple of snippets of his perspective too. I also really enjoyed that at the bottom of the page, sometimes she would include these footnotes that were from her academic world. So she would be writing about some fairy ritual or some fairy like object. And then she would have a little asterisk, and you would go down to the bottom and there would be this footnote as if it was like an academic journal or this academic book or something. And she would explain how in her world there are these different theories put out by these scholars, or how scholars disagree about what this means and why she thinks that it's this one instead of this one. And yeah, the footnotes really added a fun touch to it, and it just fit her character so well. I really enjoyed the sort of twist that this story is on the Beauty and the Beast kind of fairy tale. So in this story, Wendell is the beauty because he's the fairy. He's like this fairy prince or king, I guess, was a king. And she is the beast in this story, and she's so un unhuman because she's so focused in on all of her study. She's such a scholar that she's like a hermit, right? So she gets there, and um she's living in this hut, and it's cold and it's dark and it's just very dull, and she's totally fine with it. She can live in these conditions as long as she can do her work. And then she's trying to get information from the different villagers, and she just has no person skills at all, no people skills. And then Wendell comes in, crashes her party, so to speak, and he like brightens up the space. He adds all these little homey touches, and now it's this cozy little like cottage feeling that they get to live in instead of this cold, dark hut. And then he goes in and he charms all of the villagers, and he knows like the customs and how to get on their good side, and and just helps her out in that way, in a way that she couldn't have done herself and was failing at. But what I really, really like about it is that she grows and she finds that she cares for these people who live here. They're not just a tool for her, they're not a means to an end. And then in the end, they care for her, and she's so surprised when they all come and make this grand plan to rescue her. Like, an odd observation I had is I feel like it's sort of like Twilight. You know, the whole thing with Bella in Twilight being like, she's so clumsy and she's so smart, and she just she can't keep it together, right? But then like she becomes a vampire, and now like, oh, she's like perfect, like she was always meant to be a vampire kind of thing. I hope not. Like, I hope she doesn't become a fairy and then turn into like the full, that she doesn't come into like her full being because she's a fairy or something. I think my favorite character by far though is Wendell Bamblebee. He's just so eccentric. He's so charming but kind of silly. He's this dandy, but because he has that fairy charm, he just like is able to work out all the difficult things and smooth things over. And the way that he does everything with ease and grace is just it's so funny. And then their dynamic too, she's so grumpy all the time, and she's so frustrated with how easy things come for him because of this charm, and she has to work so hard. And every time she thinks about that, she gets angrier when he does something that shows that side of him again. She gets frustrated by it, and she just says, "Bamblebee." And whenever I read it, I always thought of the Fairly Odd Parents and the dad with the neighbor, like Dingleberg. It had that vibe. Really enjoyed that this was it was sort of a romance, but it didn't end with the characters even getting together. Like, they're not in a relationship at the end of the book. And not only that, but it didn't end in them having this like passionate makeout session or having sex. Like, I really hate when books do that, when they set up this relationship of like, oh no, is it gonna happen, can they get together, and then that's like the culmination of their relationship. Like, it's so shallow. So I really enjoyed this book. I'm probably gushing about it more than I guess what I really thought. Like, so if I rated it, I would give it a 3 out of 5. The things that I explained bothered me. They really did take me out of the story, and that just does a lot to kill the mood for me. Anyways, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you guys think about this book? Is it one that you've read? Is it on your to be read list? What do you think about sequels? I'd love to read all of your thoughts down below in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, this review, please give me a like and a subscribe. I had a lot of fun doing this, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.